All right, good morning again. We might have some more people be joining us here in a few minutes, but we'll go ahead and get started. So if you haven't already, please introduce yourself on the chat to the left, and also please fill in the poll questions saying where you're from and what agency or group you're associated with. Let me introduce myself. My name is Stacy Frederick. I work as the coordinator for the California Fire Science Consortium. And we are an organization that tries to bridge that gap between fire science and managers or people who can use that fire science. So today we probably have some homeowners or people who are interested in the WUI who join us. It looks like we have a number of people from California, but we also have an international presence today, as well as some other regions of the United States. We'll go ahead and leave these up for another few minutes if you want to fill in where you're from. And we also have quite a diversity of different agencies represented today, which is just great. So thanks again for joining us. And with that, if no one else wants to introduce themselves, we'll go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be hearing from Yana Valachovic. She's with UC Cooperative Extension, where she's the forest advisor for both Humboldt and Del Norte counties. She's also a registered professional forester and has spent almost 8 years working on home defensible space issues. So she has a lot to tell us today, and we're really excited to have her with us. Go ahead and get started here.
All right. Can everyone hear me, I hope? So my name is Yana Valachovic, and I appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to share what we're thinking here within the University of California around the issues of landscaping and home design. As was suggested, my training's in forestry, and I focus in my technical issues more around the wildland-related issues, but over a little less than the last decade, my colleagues and I have been addressing sort of the home envelope issues and the landscaping issues. And since then, we've been involved in writing a number of publications, which I'll share at the end, which attempt to collect and illustrate our thinkings around this important topic. And I do a number of home inspections with homeowners and help them make choices in both home improvement or design projects. And it's a lot of fun. I myself like to dabble in home construction, so this is a good marriage of ideas and thoughts together. So well, I would like to get started here and just say with this introductory maybe a very appreciated slide to all the firefighters out there in the world that do so much to protect our lives and our property. The tone of my talk is really about it's not all their responsibility. It's ours as much as theirs in trying to make sure that we have a home and a landscape that's defendable. So that's going to be the tone of my talk today, and I look forward to sharing some of these ideas into a perhaps rich conversation at the end. I'm going to be speaking more from the California perspective, but I think the concepts are appropriate to a much broader landscape, both internationally and throughout places in the United States. So my presentation is going to talk around these themes and in this order, illustrating some issues with the wildfire context, talking briefly about how homes burn from wildfire, reviewing some of the defensible space concepts, and discussing the interaction between the vegetation, more the wildland-urban interface vegetation, the landscaping right near the home, and then the home condition, and how those all set the stage for home survival or home failure. I'll review some of the resources that can support this work in the end. And I'd like to give a shout out to my colleagues at the University of California who helped get these collective ideas together and for some of their slides and materials. I work primarily in the north coast of California. I live in the Redwood Zone, and so pictures from my home and my home area would not do justice to this talk. So I've borrowed a number of slides and images from these colleagues, and in particular Steve Quarles, who worked with us for many years and has since retired and gone on to the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. So you'll see some of the latest thinkings around how homes fail from some of his work, which is currently present from that new occupation he has. So I'm going to get started here. So, I think one of the challenges that I have in addressing the issue of the wildland-urban interface is that I think we've done a good job communicating to the general public that wildfire is something to fear. And what I would like to do is illustrate, at least briefly, that wildfire is really important, and it's something that we now live in the middle of, and it's not something that we can prevent entirely, and we have to understand that wildfire does a lot for the natural world, and we get many ecosystem services or benefits from periodic fire. So there are fire-adapted species that require fire to both become established or survive. Fire is essential for keeping both our forests and our rangelands open. The photo on the left illustrates some of the encroachment that happens in the absence of fire, and it's widely documented about how much more dense both our rangelands and forests are becoming from the loss of periodic fire. It's also important in maintaining oak woodlands, and the Golden Hills of California are fairly iconic, and some of them are changing radically because of the loss of periodic fire. Wildfire is very important in promoting wildlife habitat for many species, and it removes fuels. So without frequent low-intensity wildfire, we are facing more of a future of high-intensity wildfire. So I'd like to help shift the conversation around how do we embrace fire and how do we embrace good fire that is beneficial to us as well as the environment. So one of the things that I think collectively in America right now is we're recognizing that there's a backlog of fuels because of our years of fire suppression. And this graphic here, which is courtesy of Malcolm North, who works for the Forest Service, and this is summarizing the situation in the Sierra Nevada forest ecosystems, I think really to me helps illustrate the challenge we have before us. So what it shows is, I'm going to get my pointer here, acres on the y-axis, and then a couple of important variables on the x-axis that represent the area that is being addressed through a number of different components. So if you look at the annual area that is treated either in prescribed fire, mechanical removal, or wildfire, you can see how much area that represents. If you look at what, and this is through a lot of scientific analysis, how much area used to be managed across different of the forest communities, you can see what the historic annual amount of fire used to be. And when you add that up through all the years of missed wildfire opportunities, you can see what the backlog is. And this graphic really nicely illustrates to me the challenge. There is such a backlog of of forest that needs to be treated that it's going to take us a long time till we can get ahead of this curve. So we need to be more prepared to expect wildfire that is perhaps not in the condition that we'd like to see, that is perhaps more intense, more severe, and can be larger. So we've got to start addressing these fuels in a more substantive way if we're ever going to catch up with that backlog. And now that we have, a growing population and an increased presence of people living in that wildland-urban interface, we have more people that are interacting with this backlog of fuels. So we have a real challenge before us. So given that as a context, I'd like to talk a little bit about how homes burn and if I can, maybe decouple a perception that it's the flame front that typically burns a home. Well, in fact, it's actually more likely to be the embers from a wildfire that are much farther away that are likely to burn a home. So if you see in this top graphic that perhaps there's time on the x-axis, and you can see that a wildfire may be brewing somewhere far away in the left-hand side of the image, but it is kicking forward embers or firebrands and material that is on fire, and the house may become exposed to this for quite an amount of time before the flame front ever shows, or if it ever does. And here's an example of how that flame front may then pass over the home, but it may leave behind quite a bit of material that will smolder and burn and have a long residence time of heat. So this is the process, the stage of wildfire moving through, but the ember component is the part that folks have come to recognize is what contributes to the largest amount of home loss currently. So using some both simulated and actual demonstrations, I'd like to show you how a home typically burns from a wildfire. So this is work that Steve Quarles is involved in, who I mentioned earlier at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety. This is a massive laboratory setting where they've constructed a home and they're blasting it with the embers that might be coming from a wildfire. So this is one of the primary ways that homes burn, because the embers, as you can see, get lodged underneath the eaves. They may join in the venting, maybe a gable-end vent here. They find the weak points in the house and are able to catch material adjacent to the home on fire or enter and penetrate inside the house. This is in contrast to direct flame contact, which is shown here on the right. This is material that's adjacent to the home that can get caught on fire, or in this case here is in the gutter, and that heat and that fire within the gutter can get underneath the roof assembly and get into the attic. And the third way is radiant heat, where your neighbor's house catches on fire, and the quantity of heat in that neighbor's house is able to combust your own home, or combust some portion near to your home, which combusts and spreads to your home. So what I'm going to do is take a step back, given that as the backdrop, and talk a little bit about the basics of fire. So to make fire, you need fuel, you need oxygen, and you need heat. And in reality, there's only one of these components that you can, of these three, that you can control, and that's really the fuel material. And fuel is anything that will burn. I think we more typically think about it as dry or dead vegetation, but it also can include wood siding, wood roofing, wood fencing that may be attached to the house. It can include trees. It can include the landscaping or the native landscaping of woody shrubs or perennials, and it also can include the mulch that you may be, or a person may be, applying to help reduce weeds and retain moisture and otherwise do good things. But all that material, under the right conditions, can burn. So we need to think about what of that we can address that will help harden our home and help make a defensible zone around our home. So the fuel challenge really here is that long-distance embers can ignite fuel close to the house and bring flames to the house. It can ignite fuel on your house. A ground fire can approach the house. And additionally, material stored underneath or perhaps within the garage or in the attic can become fuel. And so what I'm going to try and do today is talk about how we might be able to set our house up and our immediate landscape to both to reduce this fuel and give the home a better chance of survival. What I'm going to do is work from the outside in, and so we'll focus on the landscape fuel issue first, and then we'll address the house vulnerabilities following that. And here's a nice picture of some of the fuels right next to this deck, and you can see that there's not much of a dispensable space around this house. So in California, the requirement for landowners is to have a defensible space out to 100 feet. It used to just be 30 feet, but that has changed a few years ago. And that means that as homeowners, we need to be responsible for a much broader area than was previously our responsibility. And I think it's both a challenge and an opportunity for us to think through how we address this area. For some people, it's a little more daunting. It's 11 times more area than what the rule used to say. But I think with some proper planning, it's all quite achievable. So the defensible space zone versus the reduced fuel zone. So if you will, here is an image of a home. We're going to talk about the defensible space zone, which is in that first 30 feet around the house. I'm also going to drill into that first 5 feet adjacent to the house, too. We'll talk about that in a bit more detail. In contrast to the reduced fuel zone, which goes out to 100 feet, and then what happens beyond that. Certainly, if a homeowner wants to go more than 100 feet, I would encourage that, but this is at least some operating places to start. And so from a landscaping perspective, here are kind of a few ways to think about how to sort of make some beauty, give some privacy, and yet still provide some safety and security. So in this far area, it's about trimming and thinning, limbing up. In this mid area, it's about really reducing the fuel load in this transition zone. And this graphic has a slightly larger plantings than I'd recommend here, but it's about having a few foundational plantings, perhaps more in islands as opposed to continuous vegetation that provides some of that anchoring visually of the house and perhaps some separation from your neighbor. So what does the law say for California? Well, spacing is dependent on slope and the height of vegetation and fire risk. So the steeper the slope, the more spacing, the taller the vegetation, the more spacing, and the more fire prone, of course, the more spacing. So we're going to talk about these two zones, this defensible space zone and the reduced fuel zone, with some nice images in a minute. So when it comes to spacing, more is always better, and if people like to have some graphic illustration of that, if the home in question is on a relatively level slope, the idea is to give at least 2 times the height of the vegetation that in separation. So if you're on a moderate slope, maybe 20 to 40%, the idea is 4 times the height of the vegetation in separation. And if you're on a quite a steep slope, then we're going to talk about 6 times that height and that separation. Really, our goal here is about eliminating the fuel ladders, and I think this graphic gives us a nice illustration about how fire starting on a small shrub can then sort of climb to the next branch of the next tree, and then climb to the next adjacent tree, making a ladder growth and taking a fire from a ground fire to a crown fire. So one of the ways we want to change this is by limbing up the vegetation on the trees that we're going to retain and separating the trees from each other so that you don't have canopy connection, eliminating this ladder potential. And if folks haven't seen an image of what this looks like in real life, here's a nice example of how this vegetation, which caught on fire at the ground level, is then able to move up into the canopy of this oak species here, and then getting into the conifer behind it. So I'm going to try and illustrate with some some pictures from a variety of ecosystems. This is in Southern California, and you can see here's probably around the 100-foot line, and they've taken this chaparral and done quite a bit of thinning on it. And then as you approach the house and you get into that home defense zone, there's an area where there's actually removal of some of that chaparral. There's dry grass, but it's well mowed and maintained. And then as you get closer to the house itself, you can see that it's green overall, and it's more resistant to fire, given that the vegetation is in probably an irrigated and well-maintained condition. There's quite a bit of separation of the vegetation from the house as well. So this picture gets a fairly good pass on what the overall goals are. If you live in a place where it looks like this, of course the challenge is much harder, but it is doable, and there are a lot of incentive programs. The Fire Safe Councils in many communities have assembled resources. There may be chipper loaner programs that can help people work through trimming some of this vegetation and consuming it and reducing it overall. But this certainly is a challenging place to work. Here in El Dorado County, you can see a line of treatment on the right here where it's thinned out, and here's perhaps what it looked like before, but this is on the outside, so on the outside of that reduced fuel zone. So a nice job of changing the fuel profile so that if a fire came from this direction, it would begin to hopefully lay down and become more just of a ground fire as it approaches if the house is over here on the right. So how do you decide what to take out, what to keep? I'm going to try to give some pointers around that. This graphic comes from one of the materials I'll reference later. But the idea is about separating, perhaps about making islands, and overall just reducing the density. So in this graphic we illustrate a house that has quite a bit of vegetation around it, and we're recommending that you thin out that area immediately close to the house, and you take out and separate some of the remaining material, or the remaining vegetation, so that you don't have connected canopies and you don't have that opportunity for fuel ladders. There's no formal prescriptive way to do this. What I recommend what folks do is, if perhaps this is the main view window and there's a home on the left-hand side, well then maybe you retain something that is an island that provides you some visual separation, but where you don't have a need for visual separation, that you really thin it out, say maybe over in this direction. And so you work strategically to both provide that beauty and that privacy, yet at the same time the fire safety that we all like to have. So here again from El Dorado County, an example of both thinning, limbing, separating, creating some islands, good mowed and cut grass, and the trees are largely farther away from the home as opposed to closer to the home, with a well-irrigated lawn more close to the home. So this is the general direction that we're recommending. By comparison, here's someone's oasis that they have planted quite extensively, and I would call this overplanting. This would be what we're trying to discourage people from doing, because there really is tremendous fuel ladders and continuity connecting the vegetation to the house, and lots of opportunity for this house to become vulnerable to both the embers coming in from the outside or this vegetation catching on fire and bringing more fire immediately adjacent to the house. So there's lots of opportunity for creating mosaics. Here's an illustration of some of the island concepts where the grass serves as because it's irrigated, serves as a fuel break, providing some separation between one planting on the left side versus on the right side. But there's also opportunity to incorporate hardscape and nature into the design. In this photo, these walkways can become fuel breaks. I like many things about this photo. However, I think this tree is a little too close to what I think is a structure here. So there's some more pruning and limbing that could occur in this image, but some nice illustration of something that doesn't take water to maintain, yet provides some of that visual satisfaction that some of us are looking for. So hardscape is really important and can look like the gravel here on the right, or more of the stone here on the left. It can be bare earth, it can be cement, it can be any number of items, but it's non-combustible, and that's the most important part about it. And so what we're going to be talking about is where to place this hardscape and how to get the most value out of it from a home defense perspective. Our primary recommendation is that you separate the vegetation from the house. And so in this illustration here, there's a gravel walkway that is around the entire outside of this house, and this is exactly what we'd like to see. While the house is a redwood shake, there isn't any immediate vegetation that's going to catch on fire adjacent to this house. So it's about pulling that vegetation off and putting the vegetation farther away from the home. That's great for home maintenance. It's also a great way to keep some of the bugs and critters out of your house. And I think just takes a little reshifting in how we tend to think about putting the vegetation right close to the home. But with a little work, I think we can get a lot of the same aesthetic, but with just a little rethinking about how we locate our landscaping. So our recommendation is a 0 to 5 foot non-combustible zone to reduce the chance of flame contact or exposure both to the siding of the house and for material that can catch on fire and get in through the vents and also concentrate heat underneath the eaves. So here's an illustration of that defensible zone. This set of photos, however, shows that this homeowner is a bit inconsistent. They've provided it on one side of the property, but on the other side, they've got the vegetation very close up to the home. And so what we're recommending is taking out some of these bigger shrubs that are adjacent to the home and putting something that is less likely to burn and get caught on fire from some of those embers that may be sent directly towards this house. So the basic message is near the house, keep it green and healthy. We are in California facing our 4th year of drought, sort of unprecedented levels of drought. And so it's important also to conserve water. From an ecosystem perspective, I'm not recommending that we water everything. I think it's about choosing plants wisely that both have low water needs and yet provide us some of that fire safety and that fire defense. So maybe it's about simplifying and minimizing some of those areas where we'd like that lush green look and accepting a little less of that overall, but still providing some of that beauty that we seek. So one of the fundamental questions that always comes up is, are there and is there a fire-resistant plant list? And you will note when you look on the web that there are numerous plant lists. However, all plants can burn regardless of how they're marketed. And we don't want to give people a false sense of security with a plant that is rated when it can be poorly maintained and become just as much fuel as one that is rated at high risk. So it's kind of a touchy subject here. I know that people want guidance. So what we're recommending is really that you think about the the overall maintenance, both the pruning, the irrigation, and the cleaning, and then some of the structures that the plants have, things that are perhaps more low-growing, open-structured. They're less resonance. They have less likely to retain dead material, and they have overall higher moisture content as plants to choose. Natives and drought-tolerant species can be good options, but they have to be maintained well. I think the challenge is that when you look at some of these plant lists, there's not much data behind any of their rankings or ratings. And so as consumers, we need to be smart about what we choose, and then we need to think about, well, can we maintain this species? Is it going to require more water than we have? Is it going to require more pruning and maintenance than we can provide? Well, if so, maybe it's not the right choice for us in this location. So thinking more strategically about those issues, I think helps me understand what kind of choices I might place in my future plant lists and my future projects. But the bottom line is all plants can burn under the right conditions. So maintenance is critical in all of this. Now, there's also a need for mulch and for using mulch to retain moisture, but we also must understand that mulch can burn too. And I was talking to Susie Cochard earlier today. She's one of my colleagues, and in some locations, in the location where she works, there's a requirement to mulch plantings and to retain soils and make sure that you don't have runoff. So given that interest, Steve Quarles and Ed Smith from University of Nevada did some research to look at the flammability of different mulch products, and I'll provide a link to that material at the end of the talk here. So here's just some illustrations. Rubber mulch, something that you might see in a playground environment, versus pine needle mulch versus bark mulch. And the answer was they all burn. The rubber mulch had a tremendous amount of flame height and heat coming off of it, so something that to be quite wary of. And the pine needle mulch had really high, fast rate of spread, had good flame height. The bark mulch smoldered a bit more by comparison to the other two. There really is no perfect alternative in all of this, though what we'd like to say is, use hardscape and rock mulch or lawns in that area that's less than 5 feet from the home. That's what's probably most important, is thinking strategically in along those lines. And being aware that the mulch can also contribute to the challenge of maintaining the fire defensibility of an individual home. So where not to plant? I think that's one of the critical questions. So, and that's where I think the landscaping piece comes in the most. So in this illustration here is a home, here's a cement walkway, at least 5 feet in wide, and the vegetation is on the outside. What we don't want to see is this vegetation both in front of the window and touching the siding or underneath the vent here or the eave, because if it is located here, it can catch on fire and cause more localized embers to generate and then get impelled in through, in this case, the gable end vent, or creating some additional heat under the eave, or perhaps going in the soffitted eave, or causing too much heat against this window itself. So we want to separate all of that stuff. We don't want the vegetation also adjacent to the siding, which can have some assembly issues and the flames can get underneath the siding, or perhaps there's some gaps and cracks and overall weak points where fire can impinge and get directly into the house. We also certainly don't want it under or near decks, and I'm also going to make some recommendations about avoiding these inside corners here. And in part, that's because at least in my house, what I observe here is that this is the place where the leaf material accumulates. The wind blows into this area and accumulates quite a bit of unwanted debris from the surrounding trees in my home. And so that's a place where you get additional accumulations of materials, and you can also get that same kind of eddy effect of wind, both with fire, and so you can have increased heat in this overall area. So here's all the no places. And what we're trying to say is move that vegetation farther away from the home, put it in islands, and give some separation to that house. So let's now get a little closer and look at the house design itself. So here's from the work that Steve Quarles has been doing at the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, and this is a giant laboratory where they're able to construct a home, and here they're able to simulate some of that ember exposure on the house. And you can, I think it's just pretty awesome overall to look at the quantity and the potential of where all those weak points are in the house and how much bombardment a house can potentially take from these embers. It's rather humbling to think about how easy it is for just one of those embers to get lodged into a place that can start its own fire. And they had some cameras inside the house that they were showing in the previous slide, and here you can see with some fancy photography how these embers come in through this open eave vent. And if there was something combustible on the inside, those embers can land on the combustible vegetation and start a fire inside your house, and all your effort to harden it on the outside becomes in vain. That being said, vents are critically important for moisture management. If we don't have vents on our homes, then our homes can't deal with all the moisture that's collected inside the house and doesn't have a way for it to get out, and you lead to mold and some overall structural issues. So we need vents, but we just need to know what the risks are associated with them. And there's certainly more work coming on around vent design that both lets moisture out and at the same time perhaps hardens the house from embers coming in. So there's more work on that to come soon, but here is, I think, a good wake-up call. I know I store stuff in my attic, and this is a place that I need to rethink what's inside the attic. So litter accumulation is, I think, an obvious problem, but what is not so obvious is this house probably has a well-designed Class A roof, but because of the complex roof, because you see it's not quite a dormer, but you've got shingle siding adjacent to that Class A roof with litter accumulation right at that transition. This section of wall unit is not designed to withstand fire if this material was to become engulfed in fire. So we have a real weak point right here. And here's an illustration on this dormer unit where you can see, the fire is right against the siding, which is not Class A. So if there was one easy project to do, perhaps, it's not easy to get rid of the dormer, and you probably have a lot of value in the dormer, but this component of a house could be retrofitted to be more likely to withstand fire. It could be a combination of more metal flashing. It could be a different siding product. There's a couple of different ways to think about this here. And certainly the use of the wood shingles up on this upper left has more vulnerability than some other siding choices would. Gutters, of course, collect material, and they move water away from the home, and they keep water from penetrating the lower portions of our house, where if there was not a gutter, there would be quite a bit of moisture on this lower half of the house. But they also can catch, here in this case, pine needles, it looks like, and so maintenance is really critical. I haven't seen a really good gutter guard that keeps the needles out and keeps the water in. It's really about good old-fashioned elbow grease, I think, in maintaining gutters. The challenge with gutters that that catch on fire is illustrated in this photo on the right, where you can see a plastic gutter versus a metal gutter. The plastic gutter catches on fire and then it gets hot enough to melt and fall away, where the metal gutter stays in place. That allows flames to go underneath the Class A roofing and get into the decking or even into the attic, and can become a great point for entry and a loss of a house. So gutters need to be maintained, and we need to think about how to do that in a way that's achievable. If you've got a double-story house, maybe it's hiring a contractor, but it's essential work. Another point to illustrate is in this set of photos here, there was hardscaping next to this garage, but the landowner had stored their firewood within that immediate zone, and that firewood unfortunately combusted in this fire. It didn't go through the hardboard siding, but it did provide enough radiant heat that it caught some of the material inside the garage on fire itself. So it's really important during the dry time of year to move that firewood away from the house. Stored building materials under a deck, also very problematic. Easy to want to put it there, but creates a great weakness. If the deck were to catch on fire because of the stored materials underneath the deck, there's a very high probability that the home would be lost, given the amount of heat from that deck being on fire and the connection and the continuity to the main house. So here's a much better illustration of use of rock gravel here to provide a non-combustible zone underneath this deck. So other things to think about is lots of material can become fuels themselves. In this photo series, you can see a broom catching on fire from the ember penetration. You can also see firewood underneath this simulated deck catching on fire, which can cause the deck itself to catch on fire, which I think we're starting to see in this simulation. But you also can imagine that collected here in this case leaf litter can catch on fire, and there's a pretty good gap underneath this section of wall, and a real easy way for the immediate fire here to move into the home on the other side. So in the summertime, it's really about moving all of that material that can become fuel away from the house. That can be the deck furniture, it can be the broom, it can be any number of stored items on the outside. And, you know, an important thing to remember is that your neighbor's house could be in that 5 to 30 foot zone, and their condition can affect your survival. So neighbors getting together and talking about these issues are critically important because we are connected by proximity, and we need to work together to provide our mutual home defense. So I'm about to wrap up here. This effort here is, synthesizing several publications that our shop has been involved in producing. Home Landscaping for Fire, along with Home Survival in Wildfire-Prone Areas, and the Combustibility of Landscape Mulches. All of these are available on this one website, along with a variety of other resources, including some of our work at our Center for Fire. There's some tutorials, and there's some materials that you can do your own home evaluation and home rating assessment, and help figure out where some of the priorities might be in your home project or your neighbor's home project. So I'd encourage you to look at those, and this website will be linked later. So just in wrap up, a fire-safe landscape is possible, and it can include beauty, safety, privacy, as well as saving water. But it's about some thought and design that can get you there. Placement of the vegetation is key. The real goal is to keep it away from the house and away from the vents, eaves, and decks. Maintenance is essential, and so what we're suggesting is that there's a non-combustible zone of 0 to 5 feet immediately away from the house, then keep it lean, green, and clean for the next 30 feet, and then reduce fuels out to the next 100 feet. On the house itself, think about how you can remove some of those stored fuels and debris. Clean the gutters, maintain or improve the roofing to Class A standards, and choose fire-resistant building products during your next house project. And as a conclusion side, I'll just sort of leave this illustration to try and link all the concepts here together. I think the biggest challenge people ask me is, where do I start? And I'd really recommend that people look at where the vegetation is in connection to the house and where the vents and eaves are. That's pretty low cost to redo and remove some of that and redesign some of that. When you look at, moving towards replacing the roof, if it's not time to replace the roof, if your roof is still functioning fairly well, that's of course a much more expensive project. I've kind of lost my, there's my pointer again. Another place would be to look at, perhaps in this dormer situation here, looking at hardening up the siding in this particular location. That would be a fairly low cost project. But the primary thing is about maintenance and making sure that you're keeping that dead vegetation, that litter and debris away from the house, getting the firewood and the combustible materials away from the house, and disconnecting the fence, the combustible side of the fence from the immediate zone to the house. Put something non-combustible there, and that will provide quite a bit of home security and home defense. And I think with that, I'll open it up to some questions in the chat box, and thank you for your time and attention.
All right, well, again, want to thank Yana so much for joining us today. That was a lot of really great information. So here is our kind of conclusion layout. I do want to point out that in the bottom right, you'll see those web links. So the last one there is the same link that she had up that has all the resources she was discussing. I do also want to point out that the California Fire Science Consortium, the CFSC, has an email list sign up. So if you enjoyed this webinar and want to join us for others, that's probably the best way to know about what's coming up. We send it out about once a month, letting people know about new resources and upcoming webinars and events. I also do want to encourage everybody to please go to the webinar evaluation survey link. It's about 9 questions that are multiple choice and then a few optional open-ended questions. So it shouldn't take you very long, but it's extremely helpful for us to know if we can improve things and also to report back that what we're doing is really helping. So those are the links on the bottom right there. What we're going to go ahead and do now is go through a question and answer session. So I've already had some questions come in for the chat box, but please continue to send those in. Our first one is coming from Robert Kowalski, who is a wildfire risk manager for Nationwide Insurance in Columbus, Ohio. And his question was discussing new standards for defensible space. What would you consider, Yana, for recommendations of using 0 to 30 or 30 to 100 feet, which has been in the past, and instead maybe supporting 0 to 5, 5 to 30, or 30 to 100 feet, possibly becoming a new standard for defensible space?
Well, Robert, I'm not in the policy-making business. I'm in the sort of practical side of the in education and encouragement side. I saw that you work for one of the insurance institutes, so I'd be curious what your perspective is. But I clearly think that there is fairly solid evidence to suggest that we need a non-combustible zone around the house. So I don't know what the best mechanism is, if it's policy or if it's overall guidance. But there's it'll take a lot of effort to get people to begin to understand what that 0 to 5 foot area, how that 0 to 5 foot area contributes to home survival. And I'm sure there's quite a group of educated folks and experts on this participant list, so maybe we can have some conversation about that. Okay, so you are in agreement with the 0 to 5 zone being non-combustible. Excellent.
Okay. Clara Casada Fernandez, sorry if I butchered that there, is coming from us in Spain. She gave a longer story about kind of what's going on with the situation there, but Clara, with your permission, I'm going to go ahead and take your second question, which is, Yana, do you have any practical advice to community in a fire-prone zone in order to not increase the risk of those who fight fire because of a lack of maintenance of properties?
So let's see. To not increase the risk of those who fight fire because of a lack. Well, I think I'm an educator, and I guess if I understand the question correctly, it's about how do you engage communities to understand that it's their responsibility to maintain that defensible zone, and I think that's an educational challenge. But perhaps it's best illustrated with illustrations of homes that survived because of the maintenance versus homes that didn't survive because of the lack of maintenance. And I think it's probably, there's a societal and collective benefit from that. I don't know how it works in Spain. We have community groups that come together into something called fire safe councils, and those community groups recognize the value of working together and take some of that educational work on collectively and help each other out achieve some of the fuel reduction that's necessary. And maybe it's possible to kind of collectively organize around those values. There are lots of photos from California from various fires that can illustrate homes that live in homes or homes that survive and homes that don't, and those could be made available to you if those would be of benefit. And if I didn't understand your question correctly, please help me. Please clarify.
Clara, go ahead and type into the chat there if you need any clarification with that. But we're going to go ahead and move on to the next question here. And this is, are there federal funds available to help homeowners remove trees? And they noted that the cost of tree removal can be very prohibitive to these kind of actions.
The federal funds that I'm aware of come through the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and they are more oriented to those that are in more of the business of forest management. That can be for modest-sized landowners and fit in that wildland-urban interface, but there are some kind of cost share dollars that will help address fuels. I've used some of them recently and installed a fuel break along my road to my home, in addition to a bunch of other timber stand improvement work that I did and some wildlife habitat improvement work. In California, there are some other funds that are available, so you'd need to know more in your particular state about whether there's state funds available.
And then there was a follow-up question from the same person, which it sounds like they are indeed in California. And that's noting this California law that references the 4192. Is there a place that people can access that?
If you just look at the CAL FIRE website, fire.ca.gov, you can find all the laws associated with defensible space in California.
Okay, great. I'm looking through, and I think that covers most of the questions. So with that, I want to again thank Yana so much for joining us. This recording will be online. I'll send the link to everybody who is registered, and along with that, I will send a link to the PDF of the PowerPoints. So if you have any need for reference, you can also email me, which is, you should have received an email from me for this, which is ssfrederick@berkeley.edu. Please feel free to email with any questions, or I can help you find resources for more information. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end the webinar. Thanks again, and everybody enjoy your lunch.
Thank you all. Nice to talk to you.